Hello and welcome to the No Purpose Without Love podcast with Dave Garesso. I'm your host, and today I am with Kevin Neal. He is our leadership ambassador. At least that's the title I'm giving him. And I'm going to go ahead and read a bio about Kevin so that you all get to know who he is. Author, speaker, and John Maxwell certified leadership coach. Kevin Neal is creating thriving individuals and winning teams with his powerful speaking, training, and coaching engagements. With his dynamic and impactful delivery, Kevin inspires his audiences to connect with their true purpose and utilize their unique strengths to grow as leaders and individuals. We are building bridges to better leadership, better teams, and a better you. As a highly regarded thought leader, Neal is well loved for his authenticity and unique perspective toward leadership and self growth. Kevin is a doctoral candidate, ordained minister who holds a BA in pastoral ministry, Bethany Divinity College and Seminary, and MA in ministry from Mercer University, and also a Bachelor in Science and Information Systems. He has served in several leadership positions in the faith based community. He's also held leadership and engineering positions for over 30 years in the corporate environment at Fortune 500 companies, in the U.S. military, and in public safety. His focus is to equip, add value, and inspire others to become better leaders within their own context and to discover and maximize their own unique gifts and talents. Kevin lives in Greenville, South Carolina, with his wife of 40 years, Patricia. They have four adult children: Candace, Christian, Chandria, and Crystal. He is the owner and CEO of Building Bridges to Better LLC, specializing in leadership development, keynote speaking, leadership coaching, executive coaching, and group coaching, and finally, professional development. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks, Dave. I was listening to the autobiography, uh, and it was pretty extensive. Wondering if you maybe had somebody else on today. Yeah, that's me, I guess.
Well, that's great. It's good to have all that experience because certainly you have a lot of wisdom and insights to share with us, which I'm totally excited. I don't have enough time. I certainly could have more questions for you than I will have today, but I certainly wish I had more time to discuss further. For those listening, I am in a library today, so if I sound a little bit quiet, it's because it's intentional. So, Kevin, why
We
don't
don't
you?
want them throwing you out of the library.
No, not at all. That would be that we would lose out on some of this goodness. So let's start off with you telling us the story, right? Because you got a lot of background there. Tell us the story of how you graduated to where you are today.
Okay, let's see if I can make a long story short. Well, I've been in ministry most of my adult life. I started preaching when I was 16, and I was ordained. I was licensed as a minister at 19 and ordained at 23, I believe it was. It's been so long ago. Um, and So basically, I've been doing the work of coaching and helping people. That has been my focus all of my life. I started a, a Bible club when I was in a public high school, if you could believe that. Um, and you know how they talk about separation of church and state, and how that would be a difficult thing to do in itself. But I started a Bible club, and from what I understand, it's still going on today. I'm thankful to God for that door opening for us. But beyond that, I joined the military when I was 23, and
Thank you
uh,
for your service, by the way, Kevin.
it was my privilege. And I served over in Desert Storm. It was a difficult time, but as a servant of God, I was able to use the talents and gifts that He gave me while I was there. Um, and again, back to helping people. There were many people who came and asked me um, for advice, for help, for just words of comfort or strength during that time. and it was my pleasure and my opportunity to give to them. Um, After that, I came back home, and speaking of my leadership journey, I became a firefighter and EMT, and again helping people. That has been my focus, and it seems like I have just been drawn along those lines, uh, whether I wanted to or not. It was God's calling on my life to help and to build. So I was a um, firefighter EMT for about 5 years in DeKalb County, and served um, there in the Tucker area, actually, for the most part of my time. Um, Beyond that, I became a certified coach. Um, of course, as I said before, I've been doing the work of coaching and strengthening and building up people most of my life. But I decided to become certified in 2015 with the John Maxwell Company, which Dave, you're well aware of their process and all about John Maxwell.
Same year too.
Yeah.
It was 2015 for me as well, February.
Oh, cool, cool. Um, yeah, and I mean, I was always kind of drawn to John Maxwell's work, his books, and so forth. And it just amazed me that he would offer his services and lend his name to a company for the purpose of certifying coaches and leaders and trainers and speakers and so forth. So I've been doing that since then. Um, it came to a point. Well, let me talk about the ministry side. I've been preaching, ministering. I served as a pastor uh, uh, for several years, a startup church, and it was in 2018, and this is going to really bring into light some difficult time in my life. 2018, I had been um, working at AT&T on my 9 to 5 job, because I've always kept that 9 to 5 going, while I was doing ministry as well. But I had worked for AT&T for 20 years, and in I believe it was August of 2018, they downsized, and I was a part of the downsizing. And of course, I was disappointed. Um, I never thought that that would be me. You hear about downsizing all the time, but of course, right? You never think it's going to be you, but it was me. It was me, and so I was given 90 days to find another position, or I would no longer be at AT&T. So I went through the 90 days, didn't find another position, and I started looking outside of the company to see what um, positions I could find. And wouldn't you know it, I couldn't find anything in Atlanta. Of course, Atlanta. I lived in Atlanta for 27 years. I thought that was going to be the last move for me, because I'd moved, in the military quite a bit. So I thought that was going to be the last move for me, and couldn't find anything in Atlanta. Um, I looked and I looked, and was even willing to take a pay cut, you know, but nothing, nothing. The only thing that I found was a position in South Carolina, and they called and they wanted me, and actually I put some things out there to kind of discourage them. And you would say, "Wow, it's a job. Why don't you just run it for it?" I put some things out because I'd never been lived in South Carolina. The only time I was in South Carolina was during my basic training. I did basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. But I knew nothing about South Carolina. I had no family here, no friends, no connections whatsoever. So I really didn't want to come to South Carolina. We come to South Carolina. Well, I came for the interview, and like I said, I put some things out there. I said, okay, um, I need this amount of money. They said we could do that. I said, okay, well, I would need to pay for. I would need you to pay for my move from Atlanta to South Carolina. I would need you to move all my stuff. He said, okay, we could do that. Because actually, the recruiter, when I talked to the recruiter on the line, she said, well, I don't think they do any moving expenses. I don't think if I don't think they could do that. I talked to who was in my um, director. He said, yeah, we could do that. We could do that. And
Sounds like destiny, Kevin.
I'm out of excuses. I'm out of excuses. So I said, and me and my wife prayed, and we said, Lord, whatever is your will, whichever direction you take us, we'll be willing to say yes, and we'll go. So this was the only. I mean, out of all the places that I applied to, I applied to other states as well, and this was the only place. I said, oh goodness, what am I going to do? Okay, so we move, and um, but before we moved, this is 2018, the end of 2018, when I accept the position. 2017, in November, the doctors saw something in my lab work, and they were concerned, and they sent me to have all these different tests run and so forth. And they end up telling me, they say, okay, all right. Um, what it is you have multiple myeloma, but it's in the smoldering stage, which means it's not really aggressive right now. It's not really active. Excuse me. So they say, um, if it stays in this stage for 2 years, chances are 90% you will not have to have any kind of treatment. Okay, say cool, that's fine. So fast forward 2018, I get the news that I have to move. Okay, I move uh, to Greenville in January of 2019. March of 2019, 2 months later, my father passes away. Um, Unexpected. We didn't expect this. I mean, my father had been bedridden for several years, but he was still emotionally, mentally cognizant, and he was very sharp. My and let me take a segue here. My dad was my inspiration. He was just an amazing, amazing man. So, and I would go and see him when we were still in Atlanta. Matter of fact, we moved him, he and my mother, from Mississippi to Atlanta so we could help her take care of him in those last years because he was no longer mobile. And so they had been living there in Atlanta, I guess maybe 5 years at the time. But I would go over and see him every weekend, and I'd go over there and just talk with him, just sit with him, and we just have a good time. But now I couldn't do that because I'm in another state. I couldn't drive back to Atlanta. So I moved here in January. He passes away in March. That's really painful for me. It's really tough. So I'm here in a new place with no connections, no family, no um, anybody there, no kind of community. And my father passes away. So I go back. My mother calls me and she says, um, Kevin, you need to come back. Your dad is taking a turn for the worse, and probably need to come on home. So I go, and by the time I get there, um, he's no longer mentally cognizant. He was just there, and I loved on him and I prayed for him, and it wasn't 5 minutes later he was gone. So I'm in a very, very tough position now. My dad has passed away. I'm really heartbroken. And so we go through all of that. And then in October, no, I'm sorry, in December, after my father passed away, the doctor calls me. He says, your numbers have gone up. You're going to have treatment. So I have to go through chemo and stem cell replacement and all this kind of stuff. Okay, now this is really traumatic. I'm like, okay, God, I have been serving you all of my life. Most of my adult life, I've been preaching and sharing the gospel. And all of this stuff is happening to me now. Um, you forced me to move away from anything that I knew, um, uh, close family, friends, and so forth. Forced me here, and now my father passes away 2 months later. Now I have to go through chemo and all this kind of stuff for I, I was angry. Matter of fact, I was livid. I was livid. God, why could you allow, or how could you allow this to happen to me? Why would you do this to me? Of course, I understood that God wasn't doing it to me, but God, how could you allow it to happen to me? Here I am serving you. I've been doing all that I can to uphold your name and to be the person that you called me to be, and you would allow this to happen to me. And I've got to tell you, we often hear people in the Christian community talk about don't question God, and God knows best. Yeah. But I think God is a big enough boy to understand that we have questions. I think he's big enough, he's large enough to handle our questioning him.
He is.
We're the ones that have the problems with questions. He's not.
That's
Um,
right.
so I was angry, and I got to the point where I didn't want to hear anything about God. Don't want to hear anything about church. Don't want to hear anything about the gospel. I don't want to hear any of that. I was mad with God, mad with life, mad with everything, and I stayed that way for several months. Several months. Went through depression, and I was just really, really down in the dumps. And then I came to myself, and I said, I am not. What am I doing by being mad at God, mad at life, and mad? I am not hurting anybody. The only thing I'm doing is hindering what I've been called to do. And I said to myself, I said, as they say on the ground, I said to myself, self, um, you need to get yourself up, start doing what you have been called to do. And no matter how much time you have left on this earth, you do what you can do with all of your might. And I last year I started my business with coaching and speaking and all of that. And I come to think of it, I probably would not have done it as quickly had not all of this come upon me. And there's a book that I'm going to write. I hadn't developed the story yet. I hadn't developed the outline or anything, but it just came to me about punched into purpose. Sometimes we have to get punched out, knocked out. And I thought about the story about George Foreman when Ali knocked him out, and a few months later you hear him, I'm preaching the gospel. Sometimes it takes a punch from God in order for us to realize, hey, you better be about your business.
That is
And
the truth.
and I feel like I got you know 1-2 punched and knocked out. But it brought me to a place where I said, hey, I've got to start doing something now, because I don't know how much time I have, and of course none of us know how much time we have. But when you have a disease looming over your life, it brings a little more clarity to the shortness of life. So that's where I am now. I was able to write a book and publish it at the beginning of this year, um, called "Embracing Your Superpower." And I tell you, I feel like I have a new vigor now. I feel like I've got my second wind. I feel like I could do just about anything I could do in my earlier life. I have a feeling that I've got the wind behind my back, and now I'm ready to go. Now I know that was a long story, but
No, over and over again, I see this pattern. The more people I talk to, the more people I interview for a podcast, even or anywhere else out in the world, it's really significant struggle, experience God's love, discover purpose, and then magnificent things just start happening.
mhm,
It's just a pattern, right? And
all
I
right.
thank you for being vulnerable enough to share your story, because this isn't the first time.
Mhm,
Those watching, this is not the first time I've heard Kevin's
right.
story, and I can see the emotion every time you have to share some of that stuff. You feel it in your
Mhm,
soul, And so Kevin has the courage to come on and share this stuff with us because he believes there's a higher purpose for it. And
Absolutely.
that's what I hear in that. And that's why this podcast is called No Purpose Without Love,
Hmm.
because it's in that love during the struggle that we begin to discover that purpose.
Right. Right.
Powerful. So the next thing I want to get into here is this, right? You've been in the military, you've been a minister, you've
Mhm.
a technologist, leadership. Like, how does all this stuff intersect for you?
Well, first of all, I have to say that um, they're all based around helping others. Um, it's um, more directed toward what I can do for people outside of me than what I can do for myself. And as a minister, of course, that's known. We're about sharing the gospel, sharing the good news of Jesus Christ, about sharing what He can do for you, and what He can bring you out of, regardless of where you've been, what you've done. He can make your life better. And when we talk about being in the military, um, there's a structure in the military that brings leadership to light. Um, you may look at it and think that it's a little bit overboard the way they do it, but it's for a purpose, to help you to recognize that if you don't learn to follow leadership, it could put you in a bad position. And there, of course, there are good leaders and there are bad leaders. Sometimes a bad leader may put you in a bad position, but if you have a good leader and you listen to a good leader, follow their advice, follow their leadership, they can lead you out of trouble. They can lead you out of hardship, and they can help you to avoid pitfalls because they've been there before. Uh, Normally, leaders have been where the followers have not been. So if you've been somewhere where you're taking someone else and you've already been there before, you know how the road goes. You know the pitfalls. You know the areas that are dangerous, so you can help lead them the right way. If you've never been where you're trying to take them, then you're at a disadvantage because you don't know and they don't know. And like the scripture says, if the blind follow the blind, they both fall in the ditch. So it's you have some leaders who are placed in leadership not because of their resources or not because of their training or because of their experience, but because of something else. Sometimes people just inherit leadership, and just because you have the name leader on your name doesn't mean that you're a leader. Because we know
That's
what John Maxwell always says about leadership: it's about influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing he says all the time is, you know who the leader is in a room
Hmm.
when he speaks, everybody looks. He
Hmm.
or she. Yeah.
Right.
That
Right.
one sticks with me too. But yeah, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less.
That's it. That's it. So that taught me a lot about leadership. Um, but in ministry also, um, I've learned a lot about leadership. Sometimes we learn about leadership not by what a leader does, but um, we learn about leadership through how he carries out what he says, or how he follows his own advice. If he tells me to do one thing and I see him doing something totally different, then that cuts a lot of that influence out because he's not trustworthy. Um, so I've learned a lot of leadership not through positive things that I've seen, but through negative things that I've seen. So you see leadership do things that are not conducive to leadership or not even conducive to their followers, and you say that is not the leader that I want to be. So you take yourself and you say, okay, how can I change that and be the leader that I should be? So sometimes we learn um, how to be by learning how not to be, if that
Uh,
makes sense.
It
Mhm.
absolutely does. So leadership, one of the things I think from my experience, when you say that, a lot of times we just think boss at work, or if you're in the military, you're senior officer,
Mhm.
we think of a positional leader, which is what
Right.
you were talking about.
Mhm.
But leadership goes beyond that. And
Absolutely.
I just want to bring this out. You've been married 40 years.
Mhm.
That that is a big, big deal in and of
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
Like I mentioned before we got on this, it's been 20 years for me, and if up against you, I feel like a baby in marriage. So talk about what leadership means in the context of marriage, and please share with us some wisdom that you've gained
Mhm.
after being married for that many years. What does it take to have a successful marriage?
Well, when you talk about leadership, well, in any context, number one, um, if you cannot lead yourself, you can't lead others. And the hardest person to lead is you. So I think that if you don't learn how to lead you, then you've got a problem leading in your family. You've got a problem leading in your community. You have a problem leading on your job. And the number one thing I think that causes leaders to fail is that they have not, number one, learned how to lead themselves. Um, they're good at uh, trying to lead others. They may be good at speaking and sharing the principles of leadership, but if they're not good at leading themselves, they will always fail in some area or another. So when it comes down to marriage, I think that leading, of course, we in the Christian world, we know that leadership begins with the head, which is the man, and um, if the man is not, let me put it this way, self-controlled, which lends itself to leadership. If he's not self-controlled, then he's going to lead a house that is not self-controlled. And also, if you have um, um, a wife, or if you're the wife and you have a husband, and your spouse is not um, following leadership practices or true leadership, and you see that they're not following the leadership, I think the thing that we need to do as spouses is follow the leadership practices ourselves. Um, just because your spouse is not following the leadership practice, you follow. And there's something about when you see true leadership in action, it 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 encourages you to become a better leader yourself. I mean, when you see a true leader in action, you say, "Wow, there's something more that I've got to do in order to get to that level." And husbands and wives, we need to look at ourselves and see the differences in leadership. Now, when you have both husband and wife there, and neither one of them are following the leadership principles, then you really have a problem. Um, but if we could look at marriage and say, okay, my husband is not doing this right, but if I do it right, maybe he'll see it in me and catch on. Or my wife is not doing this right. It's not our job, it's not our position to make someone do the right thing. It's to live the example in front of them and show them the right thing to do. But so often we get frustrated because they're not doing doing the right thing, and we get all of our game plan of leadership, and we start doing things that are counterintuitive to leadership, and that just causes a big confusion. So marriage, I think, and 40 years, as I was saying earlier, it doesn't seem like 40 years, but what I can say is that they have not always been easy. They have not always gone the way that I would have liked for them to go, or the way that I thought that they should go. But I think one of the keys is, if you have a commitment to the institution of marriage, if you have a commitment to what you realize marriage is, it's not just man and wife. It's an institution. This is something that affects not just your generation, but it affects several generations. It affects your community. It affects your livelihood. It affects everything around you. And I understand that, yeah, um, we have different values concerning marriage and that kind of thing. And I'm not going to get onto that. But what I will say is when we commit to one another, um, and it's more than just that love that you feel at the marriage, at the wedding. There's a commitment behind there, and that commitment says, "I will be true, I will be loving, uh, even though I may not get it back." Because true love um, is something that's given without expectation of a return. And too often, if we don't get the expected return, we shut everything down. But true love is given without an expectation of return. Now, I'm sure I'll have a lot of conflicting messages on that, and people that think that no, if I give my love to somebody, they need to give it back to me. Yes, I agree with that, but that is not your position to just um, give and expect return. You give because it's in your heart to give. Um, Saying that, I will say that when we come to a place in marriage where we do come to conflict, where we do bump heads, where we do uh, disagree, there has to be a place of commonality where we can come together. Where can we come together? What is the common space? Let's start there. And unfortunately, our world, and I say our world because I see it in the news and in public all the time, we have lost that place of commonality. We have lost that 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 common thread that comes between all of us, and none of us want to give an inch. None of us. We just it's my way or the highway. Marriages like that will never work. There has to be a place of where we can come together and say, okay, this is our place of commonality, and this is where we'll start from. And that that is a secret as far as I know it. And it's not really a secret, but that's where we should start.
It's great. It's the glue, right, that holds us
Yeah.
together. Interestingly, I interviewed Sarah M. episode 5 of this podcast. She's been married 34 years, or just coming up on 34. And
Mm,
when I asked her the same question, you know what she said? She said, "We set too high of expectations." And when
absolutely.
we set the expectations that high and we expect this level of perfection,
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
where we get ourselves into trouble.
Hmm.
And in essence, she's saying the same thing that you're saying. So
Right.
the
Right.
wisdom's out, right? We want successful marriages, lower the expectations, serve and love, not to be served and love back in return, but
Hmm.
just because it's what love does and
Right.
for no other reason.
Right. Right.
So that's
And
great.
I think we get a lot of that expectation from media, from what we read. A lot of times, we still have this fantasy, this fairy tale of how um, love conquers all, and it does conquer all. But um, there's something in between there that the fairy tales really don't tell you about. You never see them arguing in the fairy tales. You never see them have disagreements in the fairy tale. But these things happen, and then what are you going to do when that happens? You know, so that is that is the thing that really puts us at a brick wall often.
I feel like we could have a whole other episode on conflict, not just
Yes,
in
yes,
marriage, but in leadership as well.
yes, 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 absolutely.
So let's talk for a minute about communication and
Hmm.
self-awareness. Now, we hear often, even in the context of marriage, but in leadership circles as well, communication is key. And
Hmm.
I also feel that self-awareness it's an indicator of a desire for growth, for
Hmm.
self-growth.
Hmm.
Um, Talk to us a minute about the importance of both communication and self-awareness in
Okay.
leadership and in marriage.
All right. Well, I can talk about self awareness number one because for a long time, I was not self aware. even coming through my time in ministry, it was not until I was fully an adult, long into adulthood, that I began to explore the idea of self awareness and recognizing who I am and the things that I've gone through, how they are a part of my history and how they made me who I am. I tell people, and this is one of my I guess mantra phrases, is that if you don't know your own story, or if you're not the author of your own story, you'll end up being a extra in someone else's story. Um, and I think that is so uh, true, because we often live life, and I've seen people who have gotten down to their 60s and 70s and talk about, I would have, should have, could have, if I had done this, if I had to all to do over again. Um, and th- I really put a lot of that blame on society, because we allow society to put the framework of our lives um, in the way that they want it to be. And really, what is it that your heart tells you? What is it that really stirs your heart? I mean, I've talked to many people, talked about how I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that. But someone said this or someone said that and swayed me into doing something else. But my heart has always been driven toward doing that other thing. And now they're 60 and 70 years old and feel like my life has passed me by because I didn't do what was really in my heart to do. But when you come to become self-aware and say, okay, regardless of what anybody says, regardless of how people feel about it, and actually, and this is uh, kind of a novel thing. Actually, even if it doesn't make me a lot of money, um, I want to do this. This is my heart calling me to do this, and I believe this, that if you do what your heart calls you to do, if you really set your sights on fulfilling what is in your heart, the money will come, the opportunities will come, and I think that when we recognize who we are, it will make our life, the road of our lives, go much easier. Um, because if we're not following who we really are, if we're not following the story of our life, we end up running and it's a friction against ourselves all of our life, because inwardly there's something dying to come out, but we're trying to follow this path that has been chosen for us, or that society has says is a good path. And so there's this friction constantly, and that causes stress. And I believe in my heart that a lot of times this is why people die early, because of the stress of not knowing their story, not knowing who they are, and trying to be who they're not, or trying to be who society or someone in their family, and it may even be parents, and they don't mean to be, hard on us. They don't mean to be against what our heart is, but what they do causes uh, friction within us, because they're trying to force this societal measure on us, and it's not really what we want. So, and to make a long story short, again, I'm sorry. Um, in leadership, knowing yourself will make your journey so much easier, and it will make the journey on your team so much easier, because when you know yourself, when you're self-aware, you can put that on the line and say, okay, I know that these are my triggers. I know that these are the things that kind of really tick me off, and I realize that if I put myself in a position where these triggers are going to be pushed, then I'm going to be a little frustrated. I'm going to be upset, and therefore I don't put myself in those positions. And another thing about self-awareness, if I am self-aware, um, I know that there's certain things that I can put on the line for those who work for me or those who work with me, that we can discuss and find common ground on. And when we find common ground, we can work from that. And also, John Maxwell talks about how we need to be empathetic and how we need to understand where the other person's values are and where they're coming from. And um, a true leader, in order to do that, has to know himself and know how far he can go. Because sometimes we have to come to the conclusion that there's only so far I can go. I need to pass this on to someone else that can handle that.
There's legacy tied up in that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I resonate so much with a lot of those things that you talked about, Kevin, because I am the guy who got swayed, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of times it feels like you're dying a slow death,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And we think of death as that time when this body ceases to
Hmm.
go on, but no, there's a different kind of death, and it happens as you're alive.
Right, right.
And the thing about having these conversations today is there are a lot of people that talk about this, and I think
Mhm.
it can sound so cliche to some people, but when you've actually lived it and you
Yes.
know what it's like to be swayed,
Right.
how do you know, right? It manifests as depression,
Hmm.
as anxiety, right?
Hmm.
Some of these things, OCD and
Right,
ADHD, and all
right.
these things that we
Hmm.
struggle with, a lot of that has to do with being out of alignment of what God designed us to be and to
Right.
become.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if we're not willing to go ahead, you were going to say something.
And Dave, there's no amount of money that can cover that. I mean, you could
I
be
know.
a millionaire and not doing the thing that you've been called to do and be miserable.
Yeah.
Be miserable.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear of all these suicides of all these entertainers and all and sports figures and all of this. They have all the money that they could desire, but there's something within them that's lacking. And if you don't recognize, again, what your story is, who you are, then you'll end up having that struggle all of your life and feeling that you can't get out.
Yeah. The story's where your power is.
Hmm.
You don't
Hmm.
acknowledge the story, you give up your power.
Right,
Simple as that.
right, right.
Wow, this is wisdom. I love this, but we do have to wrap up, unfortunately. Tell us about how people can reach you and the services that you offer, Kevin.
Okay. You can find me on the web at kdnealbuildsbridges.com. That is my website. And you can also find me at John C. Maxwell Group .com/ Kevin Neal. Um, and you can also contact me. My business phone number is 864-397. I'm sorry. Yes, 397-0409. You never call yourself, right?
Yeah, understood.
Mhm.
Sometimes we forget the phone numbers because they're in as names and we never look
Right,
at the number.
right, right.
Welcome to the 21st century. All right, and so what's that final message you want our listeners to hear?
Excuse me just a minute. My eyes are burning.
Yeah, no worries. We have someone from Facebook said, "Great conversation, gentlemen." So somebody's listening.
All right. Last thing I want to leave with is that, excuse me, the, I'm I'm in the middle of doing this 21-day challenge, and this has really been powerful. And we're going through life, looking at our past and our future, trying to design the life that we want. And my last admonition to your listeners is this: everything that has happened to you, good decisions, bad decisions, um, failures, wins, losses, all of that has brought you to this place. And this place is where you should be, because it causes you to look back on those things, not hide them, not try to run away from them, but leverage them in order to be who you've been called to be. Because everything that has happened to us, it's not because we're bad, not because we've done the wrong things, and sometimes we get caught up in that ideal of these things are happening to me because there's something that I did wrong. There's something that I did bad, but they brought you to this place right now. They brought you to this place right now. And what you have to do right now is take those things and allow them to be building blocks to your future. Make them building blocks so they can make you better. Make them building blocks so your future can be what you want it to be. Don't throw them away. Don't hide them. And I find so many people try to hide their past, hide their mistakes. We all make mistakes. We all have problems. We all go through struggles. We all do that. The thing is, how are you going to come out of those things? How are you going to build your life from that point? Are you gonna always let that bad decision weigh you down for the rest of your life? Are you gonna let that wrong choice tear you down for the rest of your life? Are you gonna let people hold that over you and cause you to feel bad about yourself? No, no. Come out and recognize this is, yeah, I did that, but that's not who I am. Yes, I made that decision, but that's not who I am. Yes, I've had disappointments. Yes, I've had losses and failures, but that is not who I am. Who I am is who I decide to be from all of those things that I did, from all of those disappointments, from all of the wins and the losses. Who I decide to make myself from those things is who I am. And that's what you got to consider. Who are you going to make yourself?
We're not defined by the errors of the past.
Right, right.
Right? We have a new identity.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Kevin. For those listening, I am going to post your links, and I'd like to post a link to your book. I'm not sure if you sent me that one so that others can get access to your book. Take about 30 seconds and talk about your book for just a second.
Okay, my book, Embracing Your Superpower, happen to have a copy right here, and actually, this is kind of a tribute to my father, because my father had such a vivid and great imagination. My father, who um, shortly after he and my mother got married, found out that he had this disease um, called syringomyelia, which caused his uh, it was a disease that caused his muscular and skeletal functions to deteriorate over time. And at that time, back in the late 50s, early 60s, it was something new. They really hadn't seen a whole lot of it. And the life expectancy was like 47 years, which my dad lived to be 89. Um, but they put him in the hospital and did surgery on him. And he came out of the surgery as a quadriplegic. Um, Ended up being a quadriplegic. The doctors didn't give him any hope of walking again. And my dad, as I said, had such a vivid imagination. He couldn't see himself being in a bed for the rest of his life. He couldn't see himself not being able to uh, walk with his children or love on his children and play with his children. So, and let me wrap this up. Anyway, it's in this book, a lot of the information. But embracing your superpower is about reactivating the power of imagination. The power of imagination is so strong, and it's slowly being diminished in our society because we're more inclined to go toward standardized practices and standardized knowledge and so forth, and not allowing ourselves to think outside of the box, not allowing ourselves to think of the possibilities that could be, think of craziness. um, we're so stuck on doing those things that are known. And what we don't realize is that knowledge is only as good as the last person who thought that. It's someone didn't think that before they thought it, or someone didn't publish that thought before they thought it. So the same thing goes with us. If we allow ourselves to stop at the knowledge that is already given to us, then we're limiting ourselves. But when we start imagining outside of that knowledge and realize that there's so much more to explore, so much more innovation, so much more to bring to this world, and the world is waiting on us.
Absolutely. Power of imagination. I love it. Kevin, this has been amazing. I wish we had more time. Maybe we got to come back for round two.
All right,
But
all right.
I appreciate you spending the time with me and sharing all the insights that you did. For those of you listening, once again, his links will be in the description of this podcast episode, so you can reach out to Kevin and work with him if you wish. Uh, as I always say, lead well, live on purpose, and honor God with your life. Until next time in the next episode, everyone have a great day. See ya.
All right, Dave.